Hello and welcome. Have you ever opened an Unreal scene and thought, this needs a lot more details? In this video, we will take a look at the Dash plugin for Unreal 5. These tools let you build environments fully procedurally, just like with the native PCG plugin. But these tools are designed to be very easy to use, so that you can quickly bring your environments to life, without dealing with all the nodes and complexity of PCG. And if you stick around till the end, I will show you some clever tips to speed up your workflow and get the most out of Dash. So let's get started. Let's start with the simplest and most popular tool, the Surface Scatter. I've opened up a fresh scene in Unreal, with nothing, just a basic terrain plane. Nothing too fancy. From the Dash toolbar, I open the content browser, and from here I can find and use my already downloaded Quixel Megascans assets, including these nice wild grass models. Using Dash is super straightforward. I just grab the asset, hold down Ctrl, and drag and drop it onto the terrain. And I choose Scatter on Selection. Grass clumps are instantly scattered across the selected surface. The Tools panel shows up, giving us access to all the scatter settings. If you don't see it or accidentally closed it, no worries, just go back to the Dash toolbar, click Edit, and the Tools panel will open up again. And if you click the List button in the top left corner, you will see a list of all the active Dash tools in the scene. So now, under Density, we can control how densely the assets are scattered. Below that, we can also tweak the scale of the instances. Let's bump up the density a bit and turn this into a nice grassy field. Now let's take a quick look at basic masking, starting with the noise mask. I can control things like breakup and its scale, which adds a nice natural variation to the scatter. Super simple, but really effective. It's good to know that we're not limited to scattering assets straight from the content browser. Let's say I already have some assets placed in my scene, either from the Dash content browser or the Unreal content browser, like these two rocks here, and I want to reuse them in a scatter. I go to the Dash toolbar, open the Scatter dropdown, and choose Surface Scatter. In the Tools panel, I can set my surface, in this case the terrain, and then define what I want to scatter on it. I could select the assets in the scene and click the plus icon to add them, but let's say I want more control. I can click on the Edit Table button, which opens up a list where I can add assets manually. This allows me to adjust the individual distribution ratios of each mesh, rather than controlling them all at once with the global density slider. One important note: in order to keep editing your Dash tools, you need to keep your original mesh in the scene and connect it to their tools. But to keep things clean, I will go ahead and just hide them for now. As you can see, our rocks are sitting right on top of the grass clumps, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly photorealistic. Now, instead of baking or converting the grass into full ejectors and manually deleting the patches under the rocks, we can do something much smarter, using proximity masking to automatically remove the grass where the rocks are. When you have several active tools, the easiest way to switch between them in the Tools panel is simply by selecting the result. So if I select my grass here, it switches from my rock scatter to my grass scatter. To make sure my grass scatter doesn't disappear when I click on my rock actors, I click the little pin icon, which keeps the tool open regardless of selection. And this is super useful now, as I want to tell Dash to mask out the grass scatter based on the rock scatter. I scroll down to the proximity mask section, and under Objects, I add the rocks as mask sources. Now when I click on the rock scatter actor, notice that the tool panel doesn't change. I'm still editing the grass scatter. Perfect. As I increase the distance value, you can see the grass is now automatically cleared around the rocks. Once I'm done, I unpin the tool, and when I click back on the rocks, the rock scatter opens again and I can scroll down and tweak their seed value. Super clean, super efficient. I would tweak the fall-off of the grass a bit, so the clumps get slightly larger near the rocks. To bring even more variety to the vegetation, let's scatter some bushes as well. Just with the grass, I will use the proximity masking, but this time I'm going to invert the mask. That way, the bushes will grow around the rocks instead of avoiding them. Then, with the width parameter, I can fine-tune the distance so the bushes don't grow under the rocks. As I adjust the seed on the rocks, you will see the bushes dynamically adapt to follow their placement. And here's something even cooler. You can actually scatter on scattered objects. Select the rocks, grab some mushrooms from the content browser, hold Ctrl, and drag and drop them onto the rocks. I choose scatter on selection again, and just like that, mushrooms start growing on the rocks. Let's jump into play mode and take a quick walk around to see how everything looks in game. The grass, the rocks, the bushes, the mushrooms, all scattered procedurally with full control and dynamic masking. And you can always go back and tweak things without starting from scratch. But scattering isn't just about covering large surfaces. Sometimes you want more control, like placing assets along a path. For this, Dash is another tool called the Path Scatter. Let's take a look at how it works. I'm in a new scene now, and I've brought in a Megascan cliff asset. I want to scatter this cliff along a path to create a kind of rocky shoreline. From the Dash toolbar, I open the Path Scatter under the Scatter section. In the tool panel that pops up, we have two main sections, Curves and Scatter. I add my cliff asset to the Scatter section, but right now there's no curve in the scene. So let's draw one. I go to Create, Curve Tools, Draw Curve. Here I can define the spacing between curve points and choose how smooth I want the curve to be. Once I'm happy, I hit stop, and I add the curve to my Path Scatter. The cliffs show up along the path. And let's hide the original cliff. As usual, I can tweak the density to control how many instances appear, and I can change the density mode. For example, right now I'm using the mode that places one cliff per curve point. You can also specify an exact number of instances to scatter, regardless of the curve length. Try different modes to see what fits your needs. Another super useful option is to adjust the pivot offset or the path smooths, which controls how your assets align to the curve and how smoothly they follow its direction. With the sync parameter, you can push instances up and down along their local axis, great for embedding things slightly into the terrain. To break up the repetition, I will play with the jitter settings to randomize position, rotation, and scale a bit. Sometimes your curve doesn't perfectly follow the terrain underneath, and manually adjusting each point can be a pain. Luckily, there's a faster way. If we scroll down to the Feature Masking section in the Tools panel, we can use the Projection Mask. Just add the surface you want to project onto, in this case our terrain, and Dash will make sure the instances align perfectly to it. Now I want to add a rocky shoreline to follow along my cliffs. I will use this Megascan's gravel asset, and just to make things easier to see, I hide the cliffs for now. Just like before, I scatter the rocks along the same curve. Then I unhide the cliffs again, so we can see how everything lines up. To extend the rocks to both sides of the cliff line, I scroll down to the parallel width section. I duplicate the scatter line using the distance parameter, and now we've got rocks showing up on both sides. You can add as many lines as you need, but one is enough for this setup. Finally, I will tweak the Z offset and add a bit of random variation to break the uniformity. Alright, time to scatter some vegetation onto our rocks. I have already tagged a few assets in my content browser. These are part of my Unreal project. If you are wondering how to tag your own assets using AI and access them through the Dash content browser, we've got a separate video for that, linked down below. I will select a few plants, then hold down Ctrl and scatter them directly onto my rock scatter. Again, to keep the tool panel pinned while switching between actors, I will click the little pin icon. I make sure my cliff scatter is selected, then head down to the proximity mask section and assign my cliffs as a proximity object. By inverting the distance mask, I can control the scatter so that the plants appear only around the base of the cliffs. Now I will use the surface scattering again to add even more foliage on top of the cliffs. Next, I want to show you another masking technique I use all the time, feature masking. Here you've got multiple options. You can mask based on angle, or set the height range where you want the distances to appear. This lets me add denser vegetation at the base of the cliffs and break up any visual repetition. If it gets too crowded, I can use the remove mask here. And one of the big advantages of the path scatter is that the results are dynamic. I can move the curve points, and the instances will follow wherever I drag them. And that wraps up the path scatter section. As you can see, it's a super powerful way to build complex environments along curves, with tons of flexibility. Now let's switch gears and take a look at the Grid Scatter tool. I've opened up a new scene for this, and this time I will be creating some stone fence ruins using a few Megascans assets. The Grid Scatter is great for when you want to lay out assets in an even, structured pattern. I will start by dragging a rock model from the content browser into the scene. Then, under the Scatter section of the Dash toolbar, I select the Grid Scatter tool. I set the rock as both the origin of the grid and the object I want to scatter. And as you can see, a bunch of instances appear around the original mesh. I tweak the scale a bit and set the distribution mode to 3D, so I can stack instances along the Z-axis too. At first, nothing seems to appear above, and that's because the height division value is set to 0. Once I increase it, we'll start getting vertical layers of the rocks. After a bit of experimentation, I'm happy with the overall pile of rocks. So now, since the Grid Scatter duplicates in both positive and negative directions from the pivot point, I scroll down to the Feature Masking section and enable the option to remove instances below the origin on the Z-axis. Here's also where we find the remove mask, and I will use this combination with the proximity mask to carve out a chunk of the stone pile. From the Dash toolbar, I go to Create, Create Mesh, and make a Sphere Mesh. I use this mesh as a mask object. Adjusting the distance lets me clear out some of the stones. And I hide the sphere afterwards to clean things up. To break up the uniformity of the pile, we can rotate the instances. Under incremental spin, I add multiple angles, for example 15, 30, 45, which applies a stat rotation to each instance along the z-axis. This can be especially useful for things like cars in the parking lot. For now, I've adjusted a bit of z-axis jitter to keep the rocks feeling natural. And just like before, I scatter a few bushes on top to give it a more overgrown look. If at any point I want to fine-tune the layout, like removing just a few rocks, I can bake the instances into individual static meshes. All I need to do is select my scatter, and then in the Dash toolbar I search for Bake, and then run the Bake Instances action. The original scatter remains in the scene, so I go ahead and delete it. Now I'm left with static meshes, which I can freely move or delete as needed. I will remove a few to clean up the pile. And that's it for the Grid Scatter section. Let's move to the Radial Scatter tool. I'm in a fresh scene now, and I've brought in our familiar rock model. From the Scatter menu, I select Radial Scatter, and in the Tools panel, I add the model. Instances appear arranged in a circular pattern. From here, we have tons of possibilities. I can control the number of instances, the radius, the start angle, or even create a spiral staircase effect by tweaking the height parameter. I'd like to create a tower. To do that, I need to duplicate the concentric rings, which I can do in the concentric section. I want these extra rings to stack upwards instead of spreading outward. So I increase the ring height and set both the minimum and maximum concentric distance to 0. A little adjustment to the overall height, and some fine-tuning of the ring offsets. I will add a few more rings to flesh out the structure and keep adjusting it until I'm happy with the tower. But I'm not limited to circles. I can also switch to a rounded square shape using the shaping section in the Tools panel. And by playing with the scale settings, I can get some interesting results. I will also apply a bit of random rotation to break up the uniformity. The color of my tower feels a bit off compared to the environment. Luckily, with Dash, I can easily tweak the material of any Megascan asset. I select the tower and choose Edit Material tool from the list of active tools in the Tools panel. Here I can adjust the hue, saturation, brightness, and more to better match the surroundings. Now it's time to destroy things again. But this time I will show you a simpler alternative to proximity masking, object masking. In the Radial Scatter Tools panel, I scroll down to the Object Masking section. I create a simple sphere mesh and add it to the mask. As you can see, the sphere instantly masks out the scattered rocks. I can also enable the Keep Inside checkbox. This keeps the parts covered by the object. Let's add another mesh to the mask to create a second hole in a different location. Let's use what we learned with the grid scatter and build the collapsed wall next to the tower. I will also scatter a few extra rocks using the Dash Physics Paint tool. I select the mesh I want to scatter, then choose Place, Physics Paint from the toolbar. I paint using the left mouse button and can move scattered instances with the middle mouse button. Inside the tower, I placed a point light to give it some moody interior lighting. I also add some vegetation to the surface of the tower, and just like before, I can easily tweak the material to better blend it into the environment. Of course, there are still many small tweaks I could make to the structure, but for now, I will consider this scene finished, and with that, the Radial Scatter section is complete. One more great tool in Dash that I want to show is the Decal Scatter tool. It lets you scatter decals across surfaces with ease. I have some downloaded decals from the Quixel Bridge plugin that I can use through the Dash content browser. I select a couple of them, and with Ctrl held down, I drag and drop them onto the surface where I want them scattered. From the pop-up, I choose Scatter Here. I adjust the scale of the scattered decals and tweak the seed value until I get the distribution I like. I can also define the total number of decals I want on the surface, and even adjust the depth. Just like with the other tools, masking and rotation controls are also available in the Decal Scatter tool. You can also access Decal Scatter directly from the Dash toolbar, like any other scatter tool. I will now create another scatter setup. This time I'm using an existing decal from my scene. I add the ground surface to the surface section and the ghost decal to the decal section. Now let's take a look at a couple of incredibly useful features, starting with the reference tool and the compound tool. In every scene you can have a reference tool. Think of it as a centralized storage for any properties you want to share between multiple tools, so they all stay in sync. Let's start with a simple example. I will drag in our familiar rock model and set up a grid scatter using it. Let's say I want to control the width, depth and the height parameters together, while still having the flexibility to tweak them individually. I go to a little icon next to the width and choose Convert to Reference. I will name this reference spacing. So now I can assign the same spacing reference to other sliders. All three parameters are now linked to the same reference, which means I can adjust them globally via the reference tool, but also individually through their own sliders. The reference tool appears in the Tools panel like any other tool, and from there I can easily manage or rename the references I've created. Now let's move on to the Compound tool. Think of this as an empty container where you can collect and expose only the parameters you care about from various tools all in one place. For example, let's say we'll build a scene using a Grid Scatter for a ruined wall and a Surface Scatter for foliage. Instead of jumping between those two tools to make changes, I can create a Compound tool and add in just the key properties I want to control, like density, spacing, or anything else that matters for that scene. I will add some foliage on top of this ruined wall using the Surface Scatter. Then, next to the density parameter, I click the small icon and choose Add to New Compound. A new Compound tool appears in the Tools panel with density already added. Now I can also add the spacing reference we've created earlier, along with any other important parameters I want to expose. If you have ever used Unreal's Material Instance Editor, the Compound tool works in a similar way. It lets you expose and adjust all the important controls from one central location. This is especially helpful for fine-tuning scenes or handing over control to team members or clients without overwhelming them with the full tool stack. So next, let's talk about the Merge Actor section. This feature lets you create a single static mesh from a selection of multiple actors. For example, if you've made a stone ruin and scattered some foliage on it, you can use the merge actors to combine them into one mesh. I will select both the ruin and the foliage scatter on top of it. In the Dash toolbar, I type merge and select merge actors. This process might take a few seconds depending on how complex your selection is. The newly merged static mesh appears in the content browser and I can drag it straight into the scene. This is a great way to create modular assets, helping you build your scenes faster and keep everything more manageable. Finally, I want to say a few words about tool presets. Every tool in Dash can have its properties saved as a preset, making it super easy to reuse your favorite setups or even share them with others. Let me show you a simple example. I've used the Grid Scatter tool to create a stone pillar. It's fully procedural and adjustable. From the Tools panel, I click this little icon and choose Create Preset. Let's say I want to create another pillar with the same Grid Scatter settings. I select my mesh, add it to a new Grid Scatter tool, and then click the preset icon in the Tools panel. From there, I simply select the preset I saved earlier, and there it is. Another pillar instantly set up. And so that wraps up the video. We've covered a lot, from scattering, masking, references, material tweaks and presets, to even merging assets into a final mesh. If you enjoyed this overview, don't forget to like, subscribe, and most importantly, give Dash a try. It's a powerful toolset that makes working in Unreal not just faster, but way more fun. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.